A person tries to transfer their consciousness into a new body, but they're met with terrifying consequences. William suddenly finds himself standing on a deserted road in the middle of the night. He looks around in confusion, his heart pounding, until he spots his adoptive mother, Amelia, emerging from the shadows. He greets her, but something about her seems deeply unsettling. In an instant, William is tied to a chair. Amelia grips the rope tightly, preventing him from breaking free, her face twisted in a wild expression as she whispers for him not to be afraid. Terrified, William pleads with her to let him go, but she remains unresponsive to his desperate requests. Suddenly, his horror intensifies as he sees headlights. A car is barreling straight toward him. Luckily, it all turns out to be just a terrible nightmare. In reality, William slowly regains consciousness in a hospital after the car accident that also injured his mother. His adoptive father, Richard, a neurologist who has been keeping vigil at his bedside, immediately approaches him. Richard reassures William that his mother will be thrilled to know he's finally awake. A while later, Dr. Shelley examines William's test results and explains that, fortunately, the accident didn't cause any permanent brain damage. However, she warns that he may continue to experience headaches and even hallucinations. She notes that William is incredibly lucky to have come out of the coma so quickly. As William listens to the doctor, he suddenly catches a fleeting glimpse of that eerie road from his nightmare. Even though his brain appears to be functioning normally, he still can't speak. With a notebook and marker, he scribbles a question to the doctor, asking when he might regain his voice. Dr. Shelley admits that there's no clear answer. She suggests his muteness could be an emotional response to the trauma and hopes that recovery at home might help. Richard soon takes William home, where we learn that he specializes in studying consciousness transfer methods and artificial superintelligence. Richard shows William his new, specially equipped room on the first floor and tells him he shouldn't go upstairs. After his unsettling dream, William is eager to see his mother and gestures to ask if she's upstairs. Richard claims she's not feeling well and suggests they wait until tomorrow. Noticing the doubt in William's eyes, Richard repeats that Amelia is asleep and insists that William should get some rest, too. Over dinner, Richard mentions that William's coma was quite unusual. He often made strange sounds, and his brain activity was as if he were fully conscious. Curious, Richard asks if William remembers seeing anything while he was in the coma. A flash of his mother appears in William's mind, but he stays silent, instead writing down a new question. Is his mother angry with him? Richard assures him that's not the case at all and insists that she just needs to rest. Later that day, William returns to his room, moving slowly with a crutch, but Richard insists he use a wheelchair for the time being. Before leaving, Richard mentions he'll be working upstairs and tells William to call him on the walkie-talkie if he needs anything. As soon as he leaves the room, Richard's demeanor changes. Breathing heavily, he heads upstairs, while a shadowy figure appears in the hallway. In the middle of the night, William suddenly wakes up and decides to step outside for a smoke to clear his mind. As he lights up, flashes from his nightmare resurface, and he starts coughing. Then, he hears the sound of someone digging in the backyard. Curious and unnerved, he goes to investigate and finds his father standing by a large hole in the ground, a hole that looks disturbingly like a grave. The next day, William heads to the kitchen to grab a snack but, weakened, accidentally drops a glass jar that shatters on the floor. Richard immediately rushes in, looking concerned, and reassures William not to worry, saying he'll clean it up himself. Just then, the doorbell rings. Richard hurries to answer it, and William watches as he invites an unfamiliar woman inside and leads her to his office. Puzzled, William slips back outside to the yard, drawn again to the area where his father was digging the night before. He notices worms squirming in the disturbed soil and, glancing up, catches sight of a strange figure in the bedroom window. Defying his father's instructions, William goes upstairs and knocks on his mother's bedroom door, but there's no response. Meanwhile, Richard begins looking for William and eventually finds him locked in the bathroom. Richard asks if he's alright, but William just slides a note under the door, asking who the woman that came to the house is. Richard insists she's just a colleague, but William passes him another note, demanding to see his mother. Richard, frustrated by his son's persistence, finally promises that she'll join them for dinner, and William reluctantly comes out of the bathroom. That evening, they sit down to eat, but Amelia never joins them. Richard heads upstairs, supposedly to check on her, while William sits alone, fighting off a pounding headache and unsettling visions. Soon, Richard returns and informs him that his mother won't be coming down after all. But by now, William barely hears him as he's overwhelmed by a sudden, intense attack. William collapses to the floor, convulsing violently until Richard administers a sedative injection, calming his son's thrashing. Later that evening, William rests on the couch with his father, who quietly watches the news, where a report announces another string of missing women. Richard quickly switches off the TV and, once assured that William has drifted to sleep, heads upstairs. In the dead of night, William jolts awake from another terrifying nightmare. The room's light flickers, and he feels a presence. Turning, he is horrified to see his mother, Amelia, standing behind him, naked and covered in scars. Amelia lets out a blood-curdling scream, freezing him with terror. Then, her expression shifts blankly, and she vanishes into the dark hallway. Shaken, William tries to follow her, but his father intercepts him on the stairs, calmly insisting he return to bed. The next day, William occupies himself on the exercise machine, catching glimpses of his father pacing nervously back and forth in the hallway. Without warning, Richard bursts into the yard, laughing hysterically. William, disturbed, approaches, and Richard beckons him over, once again speaking cryptically about how both he and Amelia need rest to recover. In an attempt to distract him, Richard suggests that William make one of his signature dishes, assuring him it would lift Amelia's spirits. Mulling over the idea, William agrees and begins preparing dinner. When it's ready, Richard insists on bringing it upstairs himself, not allowing William to go up to see his mother. Returning to the kitchen, Richard slyly adds a sleeping pill to William's food, encouraging him to eat. By early morning, William wakes from another nightmare, confused and unable to recall when he fell asleep. Sensing Richard's absence from the house, he seizes the opportunity to go upstairs. Reaching Amelia's bedroom, he's horrified to find the room empty, with the untouched meal from the previous night sitting cold on the bedside table. Fury fills him as he realizes his father has been deceiving him. Hearing the front door, William confronts Richard, shoving him and making it clear he knows the truth. Richard shoves back, but William grabs a framed portrait of his mother, demanding answers. At last, Richard admits that he's trying to fix what William did to Amelia, implying that the car accident was somehow William's fault. Enraged, William smashes the portrait on the floor and continues knocking over vases, leaving Richard no choice but to speak. That night, Richard steps outside to pour an unknown liquid down the drain, only to turn and see Amelia's eerie, scarred form looming behind him. He mutters that he can't tell their son the truth, fearing the consequences if anyone finds out about his clandestine work. Amelia's expression turns resentful, and she vanishes into the darkness. Resigned, Richard finally decides to reveal his secrets to William. He wakes him and leads him to a hidden door in the pantry, opening it to reveal a narrow staircase down to a concealed laboratory in the basement. William, trembling, follows his father, his heart pounding as he descends. When they reach the bottom, he's met with a nightmarish sight. The truth crashes over William like a cold wave. Amelia has been dead all along, her body preserved and subjected to Richard's relentless experiments in his futile quest to bring her back to life. Suddenly, the story flashes back to the morning before the accident. William and Richard are on a video call with Amelia, who's preparing to return home from a business trip. With pride, Richard announces that William passed his exams at medical school and can resume his studies after his academic break. Amelia beams with joy, congratulating her son, though he remains distant and expressionless. Rushing to catch her flight, she asks William to pick her up at the airport. After the call ends, Richard chastises William for his lack of direction before returning to his work. William, irritated, heads outside to smoke a joint, his thoughts heavy with frustration and uncertainty. A while later, William wanders into his father's upstairs laboratory and stumbles upon Richard conducting experiments on a rat. Intrigued, William inquires about his father's work, but Richard brushes him off, ushering him out of the room without an explanation. Reluctantly, William smokes another joint before finally driving to the airport, his mind clouded and distracted. When he meets Amelia, she immediately senses his distress and asks if he's all right. After a moment's hesitation, William admits that he no longer wants to continue his studies, feeling trapped by his father's expectations. Amelia reassures him, reminding him that he passed his exams, so he clearly has what it takes to succeed. But William, his voice tense, confesses that he didn't even complete his final project, suspecting his father had simply pulled strings to help him pass. Amelia tries to ease his worries, suggesting that he could always stop his studies if they're making him miserable, promising to talk to Richard about it. On the way home, fatigue starts to overcome William. His eyes grow heavy, and he struggles to stay focused on the road. Just as his eyelids flutter shut for a second too long, he loses control and collides with an oncoming car.
I killed her.
In the present, William regains his ability to speak. Richard suggests his son take some medicine and sleep to recover from the shock. He reassures him that Amelia will recover soon, though he doesn't explain how. Overwhelmed with emotions, William can't cope, and his father takes him to see Dr. Shelley at a clinic. She asks about William's condition and is pleased to hear that he's finally speaking. Noticing his gloomy mood, Dr. Shelley asks if everything is okay. William, of course, doesn't reveal the true cause of his sadness and blames it on a migraine. Afterward, they head home, but Richard suddenly stops at the scene of the accident and reveals that he knows William smoked weed that day. William doesn't understand where his father is going with this, and Richard tells him that Amelia passed away right there. He goes on to explain that after the accident, the doctors placed her in a medically induced coma, but it didn't help, so he brought her body home. William finds it strange to keep his mother's lifeless body at home, but Richard insists she is still alive. He explains that the most important part of a person is their consciousness, and he's found a way to preserve Amelia's. What William sees now is just a shell, but Richard is confident that he can transfer her consciousness into another body. However, finding the right woman is difficult, and time is running out. William realizes that the woman who had been visiting his father was intended to be the new body for his mother's consciousness, but Richard notes that she didn't work out. At first, the father's ideas horrify William, But then he begins to understand that if it succeeds, he will be able to talk to his mother again and ask for her forgiveness. As they approach home, William seems to start supporting his father's crazy experiments. He goes back to the lab and looks at his mother's mutilated body, apologizing to her. Suddenly, he notices a terrifying spider crawling out of Amelia's ear. After administering the drug, William again sees his mother's naked form, which frightens him deeply. The next day, William overhears his father inviting a new victim, Marta, into the house. She notices William in his room and later expresses surprise that Richard has a son, since he had never mentioned him. Richard pours her a drink, secretly adding sleeping pills, and soon Marta loses consciousness. He and William take her down to the basement and chain her to a chair next to Amelia. Richard attaches sensors to Amelia's temples, then drills a hole in her head and begins the process of transferring her consciousness. The lights in the lab start to flicker before completely going out. The computer confirms that the transfer was successful, and soon Marta regains consciousness. However, the woman begins acting very strangely, panicking and begging to be let go. Marta's condition worsens, and William watches in horror as his father's grotesque experiments lead to terrifying consequences. Marta doesn't survive, and Richard sends a shaken William to his room. The young man wants to call the police, but just as he picks up the phone, his father appears in the hallway, causing him to put it down. Unable to cope with his emotions, William takes some pills to calm himself. Later, Richard reassures him that they're on the right path and that for a brief moment, Amelia truly came back to life in Marta's body. William doesn't believe his father and tells him that he hasn't succeeded at all. He's only taken the life of an innocent woman. Richard insists that he can't let Amelia go forever. He reminds William that they are on the brink of a groundbreaking discovery and must continue their work at all costs. William, however, disagrees with his father. Richard returns to the lab and fills Amelia's body with special solutions to preserve it for future attempts at transferring consciousness. He talks to the lifeless body of his wife, pleading with her to help him succeed in his experiments. Soon, William enters the lab, and his father offers to let him speak with his mother, but the young man quickly leaves. When he returns to his room, he is overcome with rage and starts throwing things around. The noise brings Richard, who embraces his son, trying to calm him down. Later, Richard suggests an unusual method to help his son. He should close his eyes, imagine everything that's troubling him, and then mock it. Richard leads by example, bursting into mad laughter. William watches in confusion at first, but then reluctantly joins in the strange practice.
She's dead!
That night, William fights off sleep while watching the news on TV, which is covering a story about a missing girl, none other than Marta. Suddenly, William is plunged into another nightmare. He stands in the lab, holding a large knife over Amelia, about to stab her, while Richard demands he stop, claiming they shouldn't have adopted him. William finally wakes up, only to find himself standing with the knife in the middle of the room. He then heads back to the lab and asks his mother if she can hear him, but, of course, Amelia doesn't answer. Convinced that his father is deeply asleep on the cot in the lab, William quietly grabs the file with the victims' cards and discovers that his father's list of victims is far longer than he had imagined. In a rush of realization, William runs out into the yard and begins tearing at the ground with his hands, uncovering a woman's body. He finally understands what his father has been doing in the backyard all this time. Soon, Richard appears behind him, and William quickly returns to the house. He grabs the car keys and exits through the back door. As he drives, he once again sees the image of his mutilated, naked mother in front of the car. Frozen in terror for a few seconds, William is caught by his father, who pulls him out of the car and starts choking him. Richard notices that Amelia doesn't like this and loosens his grip. The next day, Richard calls Dr. Shelley to check on William. He greets her warmly and apologizes for the mess. He claims that William is still sleeping in his room and offers her tea, in which he has already mixed sleeping pills. Dr. Shelley politely refuses, but Richard insists. She then asks what happened to William. Richard explains that his son has been experiencing frequent hallucinations and migraines, and that her pills haven't been helping. Since William is sleeping and she can't speak to him, Dr. Shelley suggests he come to the clinic for an appointment. She's about to leave when she hears a strange noise from upstairs. Richard assures her that he simply forgot to close the door and rushes upstairs. A few minutes later, Dr. Shelley follows him, only to nearly collide with a terrified William, leaving her confused. William runs downstairs and calls the police, reporting that his father is killing people. Richard then appears on the stairs, and William begs him to stop, trying to convince him that Amelia is truly gone and there's nothing more they can do for her. But Richard turns to Dr. Shelley, claiming this is exactly what he warned her about and that his son is just delusional. However, Dr. Shelley doesn't believe him, and when he approaches her, she strikes him in the face. Richard retaliates by attacking Shelley, and William tries to defend her. But Richard shoves his son aside and injects Shelley in the neck with a sedative. As she loses consciousness, Richard begins dragging her upstairs. William grabs his father's leg, trying to stop him, but Richard is too strong. When William regains consciousness, he once again sees his mutilated mother, tears in her eyes. He finds the strength to rise and makes the decision to stop his father at any cost. He heads to the lab and sees that Richard is already preparing Dr. Shelley for the consciousness transfer. A struggle ensues between father and son. William manages to grab a scalpel and tries to defend himself with it. However, Richard grabs his son's arm and wounds him in the stomach with the scalpel. Richard then begins the process of transferring Amelia's consciousness into Shelley's body. He leans over William and declares that he will continue the experiment no matter what. In that moment, William seizes another scalpel nearby and unexpectedly strikes Richard in the neck. Both father and son quickly weaken from their wounds and fall unconscious. However, Shelley suddenly awakens. She speaks to William, and it becomes clear that this time the experiment has succeeded. Amelia's consciousness truly resides in her, but unfortunately, neither Richard nor William will ever know. Would you go as far as conducting such experiments to save the lives of your loved ones, or is there no justification for such cruelty? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. Don't forget to hit the like button, and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.